24th of February. It's a Friday, 2006. We're in downtown Worcester, Massachusetts, where we've been for nearly 3 weeks, scanning photographs from the collection of K.S. Melikian and Melikian Studios. We're at a corner called Harrington Corner, which is on the corner of Main Street and Front Street, a central part of town. Worcester has seen slightly better days, but in any case, the third floor of this building is where the Melikian Studios have done their work for over 85 years. It's certainly one of the oldest studios of classic photography in Worcester. The entrance, which we'll see in a moment, is down below. The building is predominantly vacant right now. A lot of downtowns across the country, of course, have lost their former vigor. There's a lot of activity, but the building is, in fact, only partially filled. The Melikian Studio is run by the daughter of K.S. Melikian, Mary Melikian, and her cousin June Benoit. Her grandfather was the older brother of Mary Melikian's father, K.S. Melikian, or Kazar Sarkis Melikian, as we would say in Armenian. Downtown Worcester is still pretty busy, especially in the Harrington Corner area. We'll be able to see down Front Street, and then, of course, one of the real signposts of Worcester is the old City Hall, done in the Venetian and Florentine style. Actually, magnificent architecture. The building is in quite good shape, still being used, of course. And behind it is the old Worcester Commons, a lot of old monuments and what all. The downtown city center is something that postdates me, but the fact is that the City Hall is still a pretty impressive monument. Mr. Melikian, interestingly, photographed the tower more than once over the years, and some postcards were made showing the City Hall. He was never given credit on these postcards, but I was pleased to learn that, in fact, he did it from his studio window. This will be a much brighter view of the tower. Now we're across the street in the lobby of the building, and we're going to walk upstairs even though there's an elevator. And now this is the corridor of the studio. After going through that blustery windstorm and snow flurries, we're here on the third floor, looking at the main entrance to the studio office. We see Mary Melikian from a distance. She's talking to her cousin June. As we've said, the two of them now maintain the Melikian Studios. So we'll make our way down there and introduce ourselves. We're in the studio now, and Mary Melikian is on the right. She'll say hello in a moment. Say hi, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Melikian.
And to her right is June Benoit, her cousin.
Hello, how are you?
They've been running the Melikian Studios since Mary's dad died in March, I guess, of 1969.
Yeah, that's right.
Prior to that, it was called the K.S. Melikian Studio, but now they just go by Melikian. But they've been holding the fort for quite a few years. And of course, they worked with Mr. Melikian right from the beginning. Mary helped her dad in all kinds of things, doing coloration, and June also, even as she was a young girl. So they've spent quite a few years in these quarters. In fact, I think Mary said that they've been here some 85, going on 86 years in this very building.
1920, yeah.
Yeah, they occupy a little less space than they used to do, but the place is what I call a pocket battleship. The place is so tightly worked up that there's all kinds of history right here in this one room. You could spend a lifetime. We've been here 3 weeks, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we could have spent 3 years here. I'm Abraham der Krikorian, also known as Abram der Krikorian, born in Worcester, Mass, but lo these many years away from this fine city. The aspect of history around here that becomes really evident all over the place, as we said, is that this has been a family business for donkey's years. Here's a picture of Mr. Melikian taken by himself. He was really quite ingenious, I think, taking
Was.
all kinds of pictures of himself, by himself, apparently with a camera that we're going to see before too long, with a long extension cord and bulb. But here's a nice wedding picture. He apparently relinquished the opportunity on this one occasion to not take his own wedding picture. Mary said that someone else took that photo.
Yeah.
But there he is with his wife, Therese.
Right.
Mary is the offspring of this union. Unfortunately, Mrs. Melikian died all too young of
In
tuberculosis.
1941.
41, and she was what, 39, 41
Oh,
years
she's
old?
41, I think.
Yeah.
41, yeah.
Much too young of tuberculosis, as so many people did in that period. But in any case, if you just go through all these shelves, you'll see how much history there is. Everywhere. And a little bit later on, we'll show you a bust that was made by
And
his
here's-
older brother,
here's a
June's
photo-
grandfather.
There's a photograph
In
of
fact,
June with the bust.
here's a nice picture. June
Should
can,
maybe take it out
I'll
of the,
give it to June in a moment here.
This
But
bust was made by June's grandfather. It's a plaster of Paris bust. And June's grandfather, my father's brother, Partygoers, used to make up these sculptures.
he was clearly very talented. He did the altar for the Armenian Apostolic Church of Our Savior.
Yeah.
He did St. Mary's Assyrian church altar.
Yeah.
He apparently did things for the Haverhill Church as well. I mean,
did.
just all over the place.
And he died young, 39 years old.
Much too young. Yeah.
This is a photograph of my parents. My mother's name was Therese Hovsepian Melikian. And she married my father, Kazar Sarkis Melikian. And this was September 9th, I think, 1920. And my father was a photographer. He apprenticed on Front Street. There was a D. Duke studio on Front Street. We're located now at 421 Main Street. And he apprenticed there for a few years until he purchased this studio in 1920. So we've been at this same location for about 85 years. And then my father passed away in 1969. And so I just decided to continue the business. And I was the first woman photographer in Worcester that owned and operated her own photograph business. And my father's niece, June Benoit, has been with me for I don't know how many years, June, about 30.
40. Since I was about 14 years old.
And she's my right-hand person, and she does most of the photographing now. And would you like to say a few words, June?
Well, it's been a good life.
Yeah.
It's been like a little museum here, working with the old pictures and the new pictures and pushing things aside. All of a sudden you don't know what's going to pop up. Something from 1900 or 2006.
June, having said that this place is like a museum, and she's constantly digging up stuff, both she and Mary have been supplying Jean and me with all these pictures and coming across stuff they've known about but hadn't located for quite some years. But these books that we're going to wave around here a little bit are a good indication of just a small sample of what the Melikian studio has provided photographs for. In fact, the most recent one, I think, Mary and June said that this is by an
Harry
old...
Sogigian
Yeah.
wrote this book. It just came out in December 2005. And we worked on a few pictures with Harry. And
And June
There's
printed
many-
most of the photographs.
yeah, a lot of Melikian photos here. People come into the studio from all over the world. It's like a little museum, and they come and they try to find their family roots, family photographs. They try to put together their family history. They find photos for their writing new books like we have here. There's Dr. Duranian's book,
Yes.
Worcester is America, and Mary's father, my great uncle, worked with Dr. Duranian's father on his book
Right.
before, and this was Dr. Duranian's book that we worked.
And this is a photograph of Dr. Duranian.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a dentist across the street.
But he's
Right.
my
And his
dentist.
father was one of the earlier Armenian immigrants. I remember him from Sunday school days, but he did a village history of one of the suburbs of Kharpert or Harput city.
They were from
Husenig.
Right.
This is in Armenian and in English, and then they did an English version as well. But there's huge amounts of photographic material here from the K.S. Melikian collection, from the Old Country. He wasn't a photographer in the Old Country, but apparently had enough interest in the Old Country, as we put it, to have wanted some reminiscences of where he was born and so forth, and sent money over, and pictures were taken and sent back, or maybe even negatives, we're not sure. Mary thought maybe even some of it might have been developed here. It's hard to know.
Yes, I think my father developed most of the negatives here.
Yeah, well, he wanted to remember.
All the
The Old
people
Country,
in
too.
the village.
Now, this is an interesting book. It's about Arab American faces and voices, written by a friend of Mary's.
Yeah,
They
and
actually
June's
live in the
also.
same building. But,
Right.
but there's some pictures in here that come from the Melikian collection,
Right.
right? Even though it deals with Arabs, because Mr. Melikian took photographs of the Assyrian community, some of the Greek community,
This is
the
girl
Albanian
that
community,
wrote the book.
and
Yeah,
what all.
Masada.
Yeah, interesting.
Catch that.
It's a nice book that she's done. They're all pretty good books.
Yeah,
Here's yet
good
another
books.
one. As June was saying, they come looking for their family roots. But here's one, Farewell Kharpert,
Right,
which was done by a family in Michigan.
right. Or
Actually,
people
I
would
should
come in
say
and
Wisconsin.
they'd
Worcester,
look
yeah.
at the pictures like previous generations, and they'd come and tell us the stories about the massacre, and they'd sit here and cry, and it was so sad and touching. But that's why we have to preserve all these pictures now. And
Here's an interesting book, Sacrifice and Redemption, done by a woman named Marion Kazarian, who's in her 90s now, I
Right,
guess.
she's still living. She's one of the survivors of the genocide. There aren't too many left, and she's one of the last survivors.
Last
right,
one.
and she had a good memory
Mhm.
of all the.
Yeah, there's a
Community.
lot in here on the Armenian families and even some of the addresses, which while aren't perfect in some
Right.
cases, at least she's made an attempt to get them all down.
Right.
A lot of interesting pictures in that as well.
Yeah.
So anyways, when June said this is a little mini museum,
Right.
she wasn't kidding. Now, we've said a little bit about the history and referred to the place as being a mini museum and photo archive, but what we want to do is to just spend a little bit of time going through the studio as it's now set up, and it really is, I think, an incredible place, because I think they're the last photographers anywhere, probably, that still do what I call classical photography. Only now are they kind of semi-toying with the idea that they might do digital, but this is photography at its best in the old classical style. And they've got some examples of it, and when you look at these versus, say, a homemade digital, you can tell the difference. It's an incredible place, and they've got all kinds of signs of what they do. They've got toys for kids because they photograph little kids and they have to keep their attention. So what we're going to do is ask Mary and June to kind of wander around a little bit, and then we'll go into the corridor and just see some examples.
Yeah. These are some of the photographs that June has taken in the studio here. June takes most of the family portraits and
These are all our friends on the wall.
right. So
Some of them are third generation.
they are right.
We've taken, your father took the
Parents,
parents
friends.
and grandparents, and then we've taken the children, and it's like one big family here.
One big happy family.
Yeah.
And I usually go out with we have a few candid photographers, and I usually go out with the photographers to weddings. So I photographed some of these wedding photographs on location, and that's one that was taken. That was Longville Acres, June.
Yes, out
Yeah,
North
the-
Grafton, beautiful
yes,
area.
Beautiful.
A little
scene.
shaky for the bridal party to walk on those rocks and to get to
Right.
the location, but it made for a beautiful
The
photo.
photographer was on
Yeah.
another rock, but we managed to capture a nice photograph.
Right.
And June, you photographed that a very nice canvas of Anud. This girl up there is from Saudi Arabia, and her brother-in-law was the Minister of Oil, and June photographed her in the studio, so she took many nice photographs of her. June usually takes most of the studio photographs.
Well, the nice part about photography is you meet people from all over the world, from all walks of life, politicians, anybody. People come in for passport pictures, engagement, business promotion. You never know what you're going to get, and all the people are really nice. It's not like dealing with someone that works in a bank and you're dealing with their money.
Yeah.
They don't have photographs of their family and it's an old cracked picture and they bring them in and you make them a nice picture. They're just so thankful. So it's a nice business also. We made a lot of friends through the years.
Yeah. June made a lot of people happy. And these are some of her photographs that are displayed here. And this is our Congressman, Jim McGovern, and his wife, Lisa, and their little boy. And June photographed most of these that are here. And this is a bar mitzvah that June photographed. I took that one with the photographer on location. June takes mostly all the studio photographs. And we do animals. June took this cat and dog. We do animals as well as
It looks like a dachshund. Yeah, it is a dachshund. Yeah, one of those hot dog dogs.
June, explain how you try to photograph
The Siamese cat.
Oh, right. Well, they didn't like the situation. Their mothers brought them in, and they took pictures because they didn't have any children for their husbands, and the cat and the dog never met. So they were a little leery, and afterwards the mother of the cat said that, oh, I could tell my cat was so mad at me. Just look at her.
Yeah, she kept jumping off of that little hat box and
right.
Trying to...
But anyway, it makes life interesting.
Frank Sinatra.
Oh,
We couldn't do anything without masking tape.
Now, when did you do that one?
This is when he performed at the Worcester Centrum.
Oh, okay.
This is a photograph that I snapped of Frank Sinatra at the Crown Plaza in Worcester, and that was after his performance at the Centrum in Worcester with Liza Minnelli and Sammy Davis Jr. And this is, I had a t-shirt I was holding in front of me with their photographs on it. So that's what they're all pointing to, because they had to walk past me to get to the elevator. And so I really captured a candid shot of them. So
At 2 o'clock in the morning.
it was about 2 o'clock in the mornings. I waited till they finished dinner. They were having dinner, and I waited till they finished, and I think I was the only one with my friend that was waiting to try to get a photograph of him, which I did. And then I've also photographed, this was out in Beverly Hills, California. This is Ray Bolger and the Wizard of Oz. He was the straw man in the Wizard of Oz, and I photographed that there. And also Archie Bunker, and that was in Worcester at the Tacnic bookseller. He wrote a book, and he was there. And so that's where I photographed that, and that's Uncle Milty there. And I photographed Uncle Milty out in Beverly Hills, California at about the same time that I was photographing Ray Bolger.
Henry David Thoreau in Worcester. There was a walking tour with Thoreau, Main Street from City Hall Plaza to Mechanics Hall. Highlights will include a visit to Mary Melikian's photography studio in Harrington Corner, where Thoreau's signature portrait was taken in 1856 by photographer Benjamin D. Maxim, and a visit to Washburn Hall, where Thoreau spoke in defense of John Brown.
This is a famous photograph. He only had 3 photographs taken in his lifetime, and this is one of the 3 photographs that were taken at Melikian's studio. And so
Well, it was a photography studio before my great uncle, and it was in the same location.
Yeah. And then before, after Benjamin Maxim sold his studio, Henry Beauchesne purchased Benjamin Maxim's studio, and my father purchased Henry Beauchesne's studio in 1920. So we've been here ever since, and here it is 206, but we've been here since 1920 at this same location at 421 Main Street. So this is a historical building, and it's quite famous, I would say, here.
Someone came several years back and they had purchased a sign from this building. It was a huge sign, but they bought it at an antique art show.
Right, yeah.
And then they went to the Worcester Historical Museum and came in to visit because it was from this building, and they had it for years and years. But it was one of the old signs before my uncle was here.
So this is quite a famous little studio.
Abe, this is a photograph of where we are now. This is the studio right on the corner of Front and Main Street. And my uncle took this, apparently, from the top of a
The building across the street, there's a park building across the street.
Right.
And he took that from the rooftop.
Right. And we have an 11 by 14 glass negative that we contact printed this
My goodness.
with.
It looks like it's winter, or there's some snow, or is
Well,
that
you know
from
what
the
this
negative?
is? The negative was damaged a little bit.
Okay.
So that's what you see here.
But the Slater building is still there,
It's still there.
and the State Mutual, I think, is still there, right?
Here, right.
Right,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this is around 1910 or so,
would
you
say
thought?
so,
Very
yes,
early,
right.
anyways.
Right.
I don't remember the New Park Theater. That was,
I don't remember
that
that
antedates us, I'm afraid.
I don't remember that either.
But you see, the
The
city...
trolley tracks.
And it's
Yeah.
like
Remember
5
those?
cents. The theater was 5 cents
I
in
remember
those days.
I remember the trolleys, that's for sure.
Yeah, I remember the
Yeah.
trolleys too.
Yeah.
You remember the
Yeah,
trolleys?
sure,
You
absolutely.
too?
Now, amongst the personalities that they've photographed over the years, of course, Mary's father was very dedicated to the church in terms of service, and he did a lot of work at no pay for the church. And here we see Karekin Arachin the Catholicos of all Armenians, who before that time was the Catholicos of the so-called Great House of Cilicia. And when he was made Catholicos, the idea was that the Armenian church would come together in a new format, but that never happened, and he ended up dying of throat cancer.
Actually, I took this picture.
You took that picture,
At the
okay.
Armenian Church of Our Savior when he came here for a visit. And there was about...
He's the equivalent of the Pope
Right.
amongst the Armenians. Now here's a picture which is of considerable interest, I think. The fellow on the left with the pointy hat is Archbishop Torkum Manugyan, who was the primate of North America, the Eastern Diocese in New York City. And he's now the Patriarch of Jerusalem, one of the 3 most ancient patriarchates in the Armenian Church. And of course, to his left is Father Aved Terzian, who's the priest here in Worcester. Aved Terzian is what they call a kahana, i.e. a married priest. But he was, I think, trained in Jerusalem at the seminary, St. James Seminary. And I don't know when that picture was taken. Do you recall when that was taken?
I know I photographed this one
On
as
one
well.
of his visits,
On
okay.
one of his visits.
Do you think he was in...
Probably
was,
in the 80s or
yeah,
90s.
he probably was in New York at that time then.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, they're all decked out in their happy black get-ups.
Yeah. This is a photograph of Michael Dukakis, who was in Worcester. He was running for re-election. He was a governor at the time. And this is our Congressman, Joseph Early. And this was at a banquet at the Holiday Inn in Worcester. And that's me in the center. I used to photograph quite a few of their photographs when they were here on location. I did many photographs for Congressman Joe Early, and whenever dignitaries were in the city, he would call me and I would go and take candid photographs of them as well. So that's one of these photographs.
Well, here are a few more photographs. we've taken of, Mary took this at Clark University of John Kennedy and Michael Kennedy. Unfortunately, they're not with us anymore, but they were campaigning for their uncle Ted Kennedy at the time. And we've taken different pictures at the Centrum. There's Kenny Rogers, when you could actually go down front, take pictures, have your camera, relax, sit there, but now you can't even do anything like that
June photographed
anymore.
that picture of Kenny Rogers.
And ML Carr, he was with the Celtics, and we have to take pictures of different celebrities at different places. That was for I think it was the Bank of Boston at the time, at a junior high school. And Mary can tell you about all her trophies.
I used to attend many of the photographic seminars, and that's one of the seminars that I attended. And I had a few write-ups in the newspaper about my studio and being the first woman entrepreneur in Worcester. There are many women photographers now, but at that time, in 1969, I was the first woman photographer in Worcester. So, you know, there are a few write-ups relating to the old camera, and I learned on this camera here, the old Century camera. So most of these write-ups are about that. And June photographed this picture for this cover of the magazine, a bridal cover. So June photographed this picture here in our studio here. So we've taken all kinds of photographs, as you can see, over the years. This write-up in the newspaper was my first write-up in the newspaper in 1974. And it shows this Century camera that I have that's over 200 years old. And this is the camera that I learned on. And I used that camera for a few years, and this is also a write-up about the camera and my photography, and this was in 1974. This was 1972. And this is, I graduated to the Rolleiflex camera from the old Century camera, and I used to take many pictures. This was about 1985. And then from then on, I used to use the Rolleiflex camera on location, and sometimes in the studio, and sometimes we would still use the Century camera. But this, of course, is much faster, so we don't use the Century camera as much now. There's an article where they featured me on the cover of the Worcester Sunday Telegram. This was June 6, 1976. And they wanted to know how I organize my time, and I mentioned that I really don't have too much time. I'm mostly involved with photography, and my time is taken up with quite a bit of photography, and these are just different other people that they represented too. And this is with my old Century camera that's 200 years old, so I used to photograph quite a few pictures with the Century camera, like weddings and family groups and graduations and children, and so I use that camera quite a bit. And believe it or not, it's never broken down in all these years, so it's still working.
Well, this was a write-up we had in the Bride and Groom magazine several years back, and we won a few awards from the Telegram and Gazette, People's Vote, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. We're very proud of.
And these are the awards. They sent us this from the Telegram and Gazette People's Pick Awards. And the citizens of Worcester and Worcester County have nominated our studio as the best photographer from 2002, 3, 4, and 5. So we're pretty proud of that.
This was your father, the exhibit they had at the museum?
Yes, this was at the Worcester Historical Museum in Worcester, and this is my father's exhibit. They featured about 100 pictures, I would
Yeah,
say.
captured on film, photographs by K.S. Melikian. It was
That was
December to February 2004.
Captured on film.
This is a photograph I took in both black and white and color. And lately, people have been asking for the black and white. But now, with you know, the digital technology, we can take the color pictures, make them black and white, sepia. And this is the color photograph that I took of this young little girl.
Okay.
And this is a high school student. We took her parents' wedding pictures. And this is a little Spanish girl. She's as cute as a button. She has her little watch on. And we take all different ethnic groups, and that's what makes it interesting. And there's another little shot of that cute little girl, and she's still learning how to tell time. Take a lot of different family groups. This young man, we've taken his picture since he was a teenager. And then he got married and brought his wife in, and then he had his family picture, brought his children in. Oh, and this was one of our nice families from Vietnam, and he's a pastor in Worcester. And when I look at the pictures, I look at each person. I mean, it's a beautiful finished picture, but each one has a different personality that you remember them, and they become your friends. This one we took on the North Shore, and they were a fun couple. They were at Nahan Country Club. There was surfers in back. They had everything at that reception, and they used the surfboards. And I'll let you scan the photographs.
Just going to pan over the wall, which shows some of the pictures, and June said that they change the pictures regularly. This cute baby here.
We've mentioned that Mary Melikian and her cousin June Benoit have been running for some years now the Melikian Studios, the successor to K.S. Melikian. And those modern cards, which I think will catch the eye of any viewer, show how nice and modern and up-to-date the studio is. At the same time, this magnificent old camera, which is more than likely over 125 years old, typifies the historical importance of the studio.
Century, made for Eastman Kodak Company, successor to Century Camera Company, Rochester, New York.
And how old is this camera now?
Well,
June?
let's see, it's at least, I'd say around 125 years old. This is a Century camera from Rochester, New York. And this is a film that we used. It's 5x7 sheet film. And we take two poses on each side. I mean, one pose on each side, two on each 5x7 negative. In this room for quite a few years. But I remember we used to put the film on like that. I think there's still film in here. This film is hard to get now. But we take this slide out, we take the photo with the bulb, and then we have to put the slide in, and be careful you didn't double expose it. We have to remember, pull it to the other side, take the other picture on the other side, take the slide out, and then put it on the black side. So it was tough. You know, that's why I appreciate my uncle's work, because all the beautiful photographs he got, this was a tough camera to take him with. People had to remain still, and you'd have to go and open and close the shutter. It wasn't like the cameras you have today that you click with a fast shutter speed.
June, do you have any idea what the shutter speed was on that camera?
It was like this.
Right, that's it. Kind of blew it
And if you wanted
open.
to keep it open, you know, you'd keep it pressed in and then let the air out.
Actually taking time exposures.
Right.
This is the old century camera that my father always used in the studio, and it's over 100 years old. And this is the camera that I also learned photography on. And my father passed away in 1969. And actually, I wasn't photographing at that time, but he taught his cousin Earl Melikian he went to Rhode Island and he opened up a studio. And so Earl would come every day and he showed me how to use this camera because my father had taught him how to use this camera. And this was in about 1969, so he came for 2 or 3 months and he showed me how to put the film in and how to take photographs and about the lighting, how I should light people and shadows and so forth. So this is the camera I used for many, many years. And then
Earl just passed away at 100 years old several years ago.
Yeah, I know. And he was a very successful photographer in Rhode Island. And my father also had quite a few students. He used to also teach photography in the studio with his camera. And he also used to teach retouching on the retouching machine. So he had students all over the world that opened up their own studios. And he had, I remember this Jack Balk, and he went to Chicago and opened up in our studio. He was also Armenian. He was from Worcester. And then also Mimi's father, Kirk Hovsepian. My father taught him how to use this camera.
Photographer from New York.
He's a photographer from New York. And he went to New York. He was living in New York, and he opened up a studio at 52 East Cambridge Street in the Bronx, New York, under Kirk's Photo Studio. So he also had a camera like this that he used to use in his New York studio. And
Melconian?
Oh yeah, Melconian. He was another local photographer. And my father also gave him some lessons, and he opened up his own studio locally here.
Just down the street.
Just down the street.
He was more like World War II vintage.
Yeah, after
Yeah, he was
World War II,
a World War II photographer, actually.
Yeah, he was mostly a candid World War II
Okay.
photographer, but my father also taught him how to use this camera. So in his studio at 405 Main Street, he also had a camera similar to this Century camera.
Which I have now.
Which
He gave it to me.
Right. And then my father passed away after 1969, and then I used to always take pictures with this camera. And then June at that time was going, I guess, to high school. You were finishing high school.
Yeah, I was going to high school.
She went to Clark University, and then when she graduated from Clark, well, she used to come up a few days a week and kind of
I used to do
practice.
errands first. Mary
Right.
used to send me to get the stamps. And my uncle said, she has some talent, put her to work. So then I started painting the pictures, and then he showed me how to take a picture with this camera, and that's his last picture
Oh, that's right.
that you have at home.
Yeah, June
And,
took his last
it's all
picture.
unretouched, just natural. I didn't really know. It was more the technique. I didn't really get into the artistic end of it, but it's him.
Yeah. You did
Unretouched.
very good, right.
And then he died in 1969, but that was when I was going to art school. Mary took over the studio, made it modern.
A little more
modern.
Now,
But,
June, the photograph you're carrying, he took himself. I think that's a self-portrait, right?
Yeah, that
Yes.
must, let me see now.
Again, he's taking his own.
No, I think someone else must have taken that.
Yes, because
Yeah.
he's holding the bulb.
Right, out of this camera, and then someone else must have taken
Yeah, I don't
this.
know
Okay.
whether I took it with, at that time, we had this, I had purchased a
Okay, but
candid camera.
I think it's
a
labeled
Rolleiflex
self-portrait,
camera.
but that may be incorrect.
Oh. Is he holding the bulb, June?
Yeah, no, I don't think he took this picture of himself.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I think I
the
probably
camera's
did.
over here, and he's
Right, okay.
with his camera, and this is the camera he
Unless
always
he used a
used.
different camera.
No, it must have
No.
been someone else
And in
now.
Okay.
maybe 1965-ish, I had purchased a Rolleiflex
Right.
camera. I think I probably took that with my Rolleiflex camera, and I was experimenting
And
with
the one that you're
camera.
holding, Mary, you took?
I think I took this photograph with my Rolleiflex camera, because he didn't take this photograph.
In any case, they're nice.
That might have been for the newspaper.
Right.
They're nice mementos. And
Right,
that dinosaur of a camera, the fact that it still works is amazing.
Yeah, it's never broken down in over 100 years.
And we used to have it in this little place. It used to be turned around. We'd photograph that way, but it was, I mean, there wasn't enough room for it.
The shortcoming is it's not portable.
And also,
Right.
also, June, we could raise and lower it.
Right, yeah.
You know, if there were little children, we could lower the camera
Yeah.
So when you said, look at the birdie, where did you look?
right there.
Right there.
Right. We'd come, whoop, excuse me. We'd open and close the shutter, and you'd have to go back here and focus, put the drape over your head in
Right.
darkness, come back, close the shutter, and then you'd have to get the people to look and, hello,
Amazing.
and
if
press
there
the
were-
bulb.
Yeah, if there were little children, we would lower the
Yeah.
camera with that little wheel there, and if there was a large group, sometimes he had stairs that he would have brides and grooms, wedding couples stand on these stairs that he had made up. So then he would raise the camera, so this could be lowered and raised. That's something.
It was a lot of work.
So it's quite a unique camera for its day. There are 2 sheets of film on either side of this film holder. And we could either take the full 5x7 sheet of film, or else we could half it, take half on one side and another half on this other side. And the silver side showed that the film was new. It was a new film, and after we photographed, see, we would take this holder out like this, and then we would photograph the subject, and then if we were taking like 2 halves, I would move this over from one side to the other, and take this other half. Like we would sometimes take 2 photographs on one 5x7.
So if it was in the center,
sheet
then
film.
you took the full.
Pardon me?
If you had it in the center, then the exposure was the entire
We
film.
just fit two images.
Okay.
2 images.
Yeah, it was for 2 images, and there was something in here. If you didn't want, my uncle rigged this up. If you didn't want to take 2 on one 5x7 sheet, he wanted to make the most of the film instead of using a whole piece of film. He'd take 2 on one 5x7 sheet, so he'd use this, he'd rig this up, so he could take 2 on 1. We'd take this out if we wanted to use the whole 5x7 sheet.
I see. Can you lower that a little bit more so we can see? Okay. So
You going to
that's-
film any of this now?
I'm filming it right now.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes,
I don't
we're
wanna
filming
walk
it
right
in front
now.
of the camera. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So
Great.
now, so I see. Maybe you can show me, or just tilt that a little bit more so I can see that. Yeah, that's good.
So this would be the whole 5x7 sheet,
Right.
and this would come out. Take
Right.
this out.
That's okay.
And that's, again, another invention. I
and
wonder
then-
if he ever patented that, Mary.
He patented that. No, he never
No.
patented anything. He never made any money on it. Just his ideas.
Well, I mean, everything they had, they made then, way back
Yeah.
when.
And for weddings, we have 8x10 sheet film, so we have another back that when he used to photograph weddings in the studio, now everything is candid and everything is on location. But years ago,
Sure.
there wasn't a candid camera available. It wasn't invented, so we used to come into the studios in the 20s and 30s and maybe early 40s, 35-ish.
When do you think? When did
Oh,
that?
this is-
When did that actually change, Mary?
Trying
To the
think,
point where-
after World War, the beginning of World War II, I think, like 40s,
Did you shut it off? You went in front of the
the
camera.
40s. And this was
Okay.
the sheet film.
Mm-hmm.
Is it off?
Okay.
Is it off?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay.
Continue.
Oh, this was the film, like the 8x10.
Right.
We used to have an 8x10 holder as well. This one that's on the cameras for 5x7 sheet film that I'm showing to you now. But he also had an 8x10, holder for the larger sheets of film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, this man came. His wife had passed away last year. He came. He never picked up. These were from 1951, and he never came. They never picked up their wedding pictures. and he came looking for the negatives, and when we were just cleaning things out, we found the negatives, and he came in,
found his
and he was so
picture.
excited, so
His
we printed
wife
them all.
had passed away, and his children were always asking about their wedding pictures.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, they came out very nice. And I guess she didn't like the way she smiled, or they didn't really have enough money at the time, so they never had any made up. And thank God we have the films.
Isn't that wonderful that you had that film?
Yeah, so he was so happy to receive them.
Sure.
And as I said, my father invented this for like single, one person, one shot.
So now you can see how you just slid that from one side to the other.
Yeah, and there's just two little things it clips onto here.
Is it on right?
Yeah, and then we just move it from one side to the other for each.
And after we snapped the picture, where's my holder? And then I would take turn it to the black side. That means that the film is exposed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to tell.
And sometimes you didn't always turn it to the black side, and you got a double exposure.
Yeah, that's how you did. And then, we'll see, this is the black side now. So in other words, we would know that these two sheets of film have been exposed. So we can't use this again until we develop the pictures, the films, otherwise they would be fogged. So then we would use for another shot. We have quite a few of these holders that we would use.
And then a humongous number of glass negatives.
Yeah.
Negatives, 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 all glass. It's amazing that more of them haven't broken.
Right.
I don't know how they use glass. I really don't.
We had quite a few of these film holders, all filled with film, all loaded, ready to shoot. Isn't that something how they thought of the black and the silver side?
Oh,
to let you know,
really.
That the
No,
photograph
there's no
was
film in there.
exposed. I know.
It could be film in some of them.
I wonder if we have film in any of these. Well,
There's none in there, that's good.
I wonder what a sheet of the film cost at that time, roughly.
Well, it was, when I was taking pictures, it was about $57 for a 100-sheet box of 5x7 film.
100 sheets? That's not bad, is it?
No, but that was, 1970s.
Mary was digging around in the storage room because I had been joking with her in June saying, well, now, you remember the old-fashioned flashlights or the
gunpowder?
The gunpowder. And she said, oh, I think we have some. Yeah.
you would use it to cut mats.
So those are razors?
Oh, those are antiques too.
Yeah, these are
Everything's
antiques.
an antique around here.
Right.
You don't see razors like this anymore.
Had Gillette's picture on it.
Yeah.
And nowadays, the chemicals are all pre-mixed, but years ago, we used to mix our own chemicals on a little gas jet. So we would have sodium sulfite and
We still mix them.
bromide, and I don't know, a few of the others we would combine. And I had a pan on the jet. Do you remember that?
Yes.
On the gas jet.
I used to have to
and
do
would
it.
Mix everything together.
You made me do it, remember?
Yeah, well, I don't remember that.
The stinky jobs she
Right,
gave
the
to
stinky
Jill.
jobs. I used to have to heat up that water and stir those chemicals in.
It builds character.
Right.
It worked.
Oh, this
Right,
is also
thank-
that he used. What is this for? Oh, these are for the glass plates. Extremely rapid dry plate. So he used this powder. I don't know how he used it, but this was for the glass negatives that he used it
Help
for.
blow up the
It
place.
doesn't say. Postcard plates.
Well, I think with that gunpowder for the flash, he was under a low ceiling, and it exploded, he said.
Okay.
Tons of goodies in there.
Yeah.
And then he used to do like quite a bit of charcoal work, some of his large portraits. He would color them in charcoal, pastels. This is from
So those would have been
Paris.
used on the photographs, when, or was it oil
On the
mainly?
black and white photographs. Yeah, it was
Oh,
most
and
of
he did a
them-
lot of artwork too.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, he was an artist photographer, so
Well, he did mostly in oil, but sometimes he would do charcoals, like of children or 8x10, you know, like.
But you wouldn't use
individual,
that on a photograph.
Pardon me?
You wouldn't use that to colorize a photograph.
Yeah, he would use it.
If you had a black and white photograph
Yeah.
that you wanted to make color, would you use those?
Well, he would use it, and then he would put a spray on it.
Okay.
So, some
I didn't
kind
know
of
if he
a
used
spray.
like oil paint
He
or
did both.
watercolor, both.
He
You
did
can
mostly
do that.
oil painting, but he did mostly.
Because that doesn't look like it's got fine enough a point to do some of the very fine work
Well, it
that I've
used to
seen.
some of those
Yeah, I
old
guess-
pictures, it was like almost looked like pastels.
Yeah.
Were on the old those big oval photographs when people bring them in now. For us to copy them, they weren't painted. It was like
Yeah,
they were
some,
pastel.
yeah, some of our customers bring in these real old photographs. And this is also a transparent watercolor stamps. And sometimes he would use these little strips. He would wet them and use them like this flesh color and, you know, the real old portraits. So he would just, they're in little strips. So he would also use these before the little tubes of oils came out, Marshall oils. So as you can see, he used these different strips of watercolor stamps. This goes back a long ways.
Now, we've emphasized the historical aspect of this studio and the tradition, and of course we're not the first ones to recognize or appreciate this fact. Apparently, at least one exhibition held back in 1985 in the Worcester Historical Museum, which occupies the space of what I remember as the old Horticultural Society building, put on a show. This was apparently in combination, I think Mary and June said, between Project SAVE, Photo Archives, Armenian Photo Archives in Watertown, Mass, and Melikian Studio in the Historical Society. The picture at the top is quite interesting because it's a very early picture taken by Mr. Melikian, and it shows really a
1926.
1926. It's a fruit stand on the sidewalk from what I can see.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And look at how sharp all the.
Yeah, the bananas too.
Yeah,
you know,
beautiful.
bananas were just in that time only then kind of being offered. They'd bring them in on big bunches and then you'd slice off the hands. They weren't sort of sold
Yeah.
individually.
And it was during the Depression, so they couldn't afford to have a storefront to pay rent for a storefront. So they sold their fruits and vegetables in boxes and crates in front of their homes. And this is Mr. Farsakian from Worcester that owns this little area here. And it's also been displayed at Ellis Island in New York, if you ever go to Ellis Island in New York. And this particular photograph is displayed under lights there. Which,
Do you remember the street that was photographed on, Mary?
I'm not too sure. Main Street, 776 Main Street.
Okay, so
in
that's going
Worcester.
towards South Main.
Webster
Right.
Square.
Webster
right.
Square area.
Right.
Okay, down that way. Now, it must have been a little bit, this is pre-Depression, the
Right.
crash having happened in 29,
Well,
but people probably just didn't have the
No,
money.
because they all had just come over
Yeah,
and no one really
sure.
had any money or jobs or and they
Oh, I
couldn't really
think they
speak
look
the
pretty
language.
westernized
Yeah.
already, you know.
Uh-huh.
Some of the pictures below, the
Yeah.
picture on the right-hand side, the lower one, is a very familiar picture. This was taken in the camps in Aleppo, Syria, Halab, showing the Armenians who had been deported and who had survived massacre and genocide, trying to set up shop. So here they are kind of as survivors in Syria at that time. That's a fairly well-known picture. But it's nice that they've had some shows, more than a few. In the Historical Society has taken special interest in Mr. Melikian's photographs. I guess the ones that are maybe less Armenian ethnic, as I would put it, and probably more historical for the city of Worcester. Because there's no doubt that the studio has played a major role in Worcester County history, and even outside the county for that matter. I think the more one digs, the more one will find out exactly how much he did. And the grandfather, and June's grandfather also. That little sign we saw with K.S. Melikian on it.
And also these statues.
It's absolutely, there's no doubt that her grandfather must have carved that.
And hold it in front of his statue.
Yeah, you see? So there's a fair amount of talent in the family that's been inherited.
Yeah. Cousins.
Yeah, everybody's
Very
artistic
artistic.
seem to be in our family.
This is the retouching machine, and we turn the light on and back, and this would be the negative that we put in, and we'd remove the blemishes from the face, put the negative in here,
Yeah.
and then they would be these leads. We'd sharpen the leads with a piece of sandpaper. I got a mental block.
And the dull side is the only side that we can retouch on, so.
Right. Then we just look through the magnifying glass and retouch, fill in. If you saw a white spot, that was, a blemish, and you just fill it in. And there was a certain technique to it, but it was great. And you want to show them, Mary, what your father invented?
Actually, my father invented this retouching machine, retouching holder, and it was called then June 8th, 1926. And it was patented in Washington. And before he invented this, the photographers used to hold the negatives by hand, and that would result in shadows and fingerprints on the negative, and they would show when the photographs were printed, because you couldn't remove prints, fingerprints. So my father devised this machine. This way it's much simpler. He just put the negative against the opal glass, and that way there weren't any fingerprints at all, and the results were much nicer and clearer and sharper.
Just a magnifying glass slipped in.
Yeah, relatively low
Simple.
tech, but very effective.
Very effective.
Yeah.
And he never made a penny out of it.
Never made a penny of it. And since then, this was used worldwide. All the photographers worldwide use this retouching machine. Well, they made their own or purchased them, and other people made them, but my father never made a penny on it. He just did it for himself, and he had it patented, but that's about it. So he made this famous retouching desk. So we used to use it quite a bit on black and white negatives. We don't use it as much now for color negatives because the faces are smaller, and years ago we used to have larger head size negatives, 5x7 size and 8x10, and they were deeper shadows under the eyes and blemishes and around the mouth, and we used to soften that with the retouching pencil. But nowadays you don't really see that, and the lighting is a little different now, so it's a little more diffused. So I don't think really anyone uses it as much now.
You think people are better looking today?
Years ago, yeah. Yeah. And then my father received an Excellence Award here at the convention. This was presented to Melikian Studio in recognition of the excellence of photographs exhibited at the 1931 convention, Boston, Mass. Photographers Association of New England. So he received quite a few awards. you know, for his winning prints. They were on exhibit at different places, museums and so forth. So he was quite famous in his day.
Now, we've said a fair amount about Mr. Melikian and his old camera and the studio and so forth, but we have a chance to say just a little bit about him as a young boy showing considerable talent in the old country. He was born, he says, in 1885 in the small town or largest village of Yereki in the Kazar of Kharpert, or Harput as the Westerners used to call it. So 1885 is fairly early on. This is before the Hamidian massacres and so forth. There's a wonderful picture of Tom Sarkis Melikian that we're going to show you in a moment. Over here on this easel, the little boy on the left is K.S. Melikian, Tom Sarkis, and his older brother. We're not quite sure exactly how old, much older he was, maybe 7 years or thereabouts. His name is Mardiros. Now the fun thing about Mardiros is that his name, apparently when he immigrated to the U.S., they wrote it down as what sounds like Mardirois. Mardirois. But as you know, a lot of these people at Ellis Island or wherever people came into frequently weren't sure how to spell things, so it's got a little bit of a French flair there. This is June Benoit's grandfather, who was also very, very talented as a sculptor in particular. I don't know, June, did he do any artwork in the sense of painting at all?
I think he did a little of everything. That's why they called him Chakmak.
Yeah, Chakmak is a Turkish
name.
word. Yeah, Chakmak means jack of all trades.
Right, and when he came to this country, a lot of people, they didn't know his real name because that's all they called him was Chakmak.
Well, and Mary's father came to be called Little Chakmak, or Chakmak number 2. But I think that's a magnificent picture because it not only shows them when they're young, and there aren't that many young Armenian kids' pictures. I like the fact that they're wearing the old classical garment with the stripes. I've yet to figure out if that cloth was imported from England, as frequently was done, or whether this was what you would call homespun.
Well, they used to weave.
Yeah, well, they wove a lot, but there was a period where they, the Turks used to try to make concessions to the Manchester, England milling industry, and in fact some of the early communities of England were not in London, but in Manchester, one of the old mill towns. So there's a very ancient Armenian community in that part of England. So it's hard to know. I haven't made my mind up on that little business, but it's a wonderful picture.
That's cute.
You can just see they're good-natured and so on. Now, this here is another nice picture of Kazar Sarkis on the left and his older brother, who seems to have been a little bit shorter than he was.
And your father was short anyway.
Yeah, they were both short.
Yeah.
I think her grandfather was a little taller. I think his brother was. Does he look shorter?
He looked shorter.
Yeah, he looked shorter.
Unless that was deliberately photographed.
Maybe Uncle
that
put
way.
himself on a little block to look taller.
Maybe, sure, you never know. But he was very talented, and as we said earlier, Mardirois, otherwise known as Mardiros, designed the altar at the Armenian Church of Our Savior, the first one in the United States on Laurel Street in Worcester. And he did the altar at St. Mary's Assyrian Church. We saw a little while ago the kind of death sign in wood and a number of other things. But he did a lot of face masks, statues, some of which we've scanned. And maybe June will be good enough to show the plaster of Paris cast that her grandfather did of his older brother. It's over there in the corner, right in the studio.
This is a sculpture that my grandfather did of my great-uncle, Mary's father. It's beautiful. This one actually belonged to my mother, and the other one Mary has at home. And here's a picture of me with the bust. And this is the altar that he he carved, but I don't know if you could can you get a close-up of that?
I believe so. Let's just see what we can do here.
And this is at his home on Villa Road in Shrewsbury. He carved it there.
That's good. All right.
Yeah, he was talented. And
In June, he also carved a sculpture of President Howard Taft.
right, where it's in this photo here. My sister has that in her home. And there's also one that they sent to the White House.
The Smithsonian.
The Smithsonian, was it?
They probably sent it to the White House, and then the
Ended
White
up-
House got too cluttered, so they sent it over to the Smithsonian Archives.
Well,
For
where would they send
storage.
it from there now?
Yeah, well, it's called the nation's attic.
And this is my grandfather, a picture of him here, and all the work that he did. He was very, very talented. And he was also an actor. He'd be in plays at the Armenian Church of Our Savior. And my mother had so many wonderful things to say about her father. She said she had the most wonderful mother and father, and I'm sorry I never got to know him, but I knew my uncle, and he was a nice man and very gentle and he had a lot of funny ways. He used to always tell funny jokes to everybody. All his friends would come to the studio, and he'd tell his jokes in Armenian, but when he translated them, you lost a lot of the meaning in translation. Right, Mary? Yeah.
He died much too young.
Yeah, he
I'm
died
sure.
much too young. He was too talented, but 39 years old, left 5 children, but they all had good lives.
Now, we've said a little bit about Mardidos and seen some of his talent and artwork and what all. Apparently there was a sister, her name was Sultan, which was the Turkish form of the Armenian word takui, meaning queen. So her name would have been, in English, Regina or Queena or whatever. But here she is in this picture on the right-hand side. The woman on the left is another relative, but we won't go into great detail on her because we'll get confused with the genealogy. Now I'm going to show you a slightly later picture, which she came to the USA, and she settled in Worcester. The lady on the right, again, Sultan. Sultan came to America, spent time in Worcester, married, had a son who unfortunately was run over by a car in Westboro and died. There is in fact a picture of his being in a casket, I guess, at his funeral. He was only 10 years old. Sultan remarried and settled in Fresno, California, but apparently her body was sent back to Worcester, where she's probably in Hope Cemetery.
Yes, with her son.
With her son.
She was buried
So
with
that
her
was
son.
sad. So, and yet there was another brother who apparently was murdered during the genocide, and not too much seems to be known about him. So there was more than a little bit of history that's at least been retained and maintained. Now, Mary's going to tell us a little bit about her father, based on an autobiography of sorts that he wrote, which is, I think, really humorous and nicely done, even though it's very short, and she's going to take a few excerpts. But the part that I really like is that he said, "I helped myself to be born." Now, that's really an understatement.
You want me to start with
Yeah,
that?
and Mary can hopefully tell some, a little bit of his autobiography that she can read.
This is an autobiography that my father had written in Armenian, and my aunt in Boston translated it word by word the way he wrote it, into English. And it starts, life story of K.S. Melikian. I'll try to take the thorn out with my own hand, writing a brief life history of mine. The story begins. Midwife named Olig Baji, with a rusty pair of scissors in her belt, came in making a sign of the cross. This pair of scissors was meant for everybody. Now it was my turn to have my umbilical cord cut. There was no other way except to help myself to be born. So I was born by myself on Saturday before Palm Sunday on 1885, April 18th. When my mother looked at me, she said, "Another flower is added to our family." They dunked me into the christening font and took me out as Kazar Sarkis Melikian. It's also my father's name. My mother was Hudik Melikian, Madiros my brother, and Sultan my sister. That was my family. My father's name was Sarkis Melikian. One day they gave me in my hand a hard wooden plate with the ABC on one side and the numerals on the other side. They took me to the school and handed me to Mr. Kivot, the teacher, and said, "The flesh is yours and the bone is ours." At that time, it was the custom to wear this small wooden ABC plate hanging down from the neck with a string. The plate stuck to me, but I did not stick to the plate, meaning he didn't like the plate. Now it was the time for the first reading book. For a time, I continued in my school in Yeliki. By then, I was forced to leave the school and go to learn the trade of furniture making, carpentry. After having worked for 4 years, I had to leave my work and go back again to school because I did not have the necessary mathematical preparation for my job. I wrote to my brother Madros in America, and he sent me the money so that I could get the necessary education here that I needed. I went to the middle school in the capital of Mazda. They put me in the 2nd grade. Soon after, they put me in the 3rd grade, then the 4th and 5th. Now the school was closed for summer vacation. Okay, sorry the phone rang. Now I'm back to reading my biography. I wrote to my brother Madras. They put me in 2nd grade. During those few months, I worked more on the subjects in the summertime, which would be necessary in my job. In this school, it was the first time that they introduced a drawing lesson. This was the order from Constantinople by Professor Darson. So they brought a drawing teacher named Mr. Mugadich from the Sanserian school. After a few lessons, Mr. Mugadich told us each to draw a picture to be hung on the walls for the closing day exercises, and that the best drawing would get a prize. But he did not give us any idea on what to draw or what subjects. I pleaded with him to give me an idea, but he didn't. But he helped the principal's son in every way, so he would win the prize. In the school, he was the best drawer because he had lessons in Constantinople. After him, I was the 2nd best. I would be competing against him. My competitor was in the 7th grade, and this was his last year, but I came from the practical world and more or less knew or could figure out how people thought and judged. I made it my business to find out what they were drawing and succeeded in finding out. I came from the village and my clothes and appearance showed it. I wore a long shirt and numerous patches in it, all colors and sizes, shapes, and which showed my mother's good taste and ingenuity. It was forbidden in the school to comment about the way the children were dressed. Professor Armin Darson, who was helping my competitor in his drawing, had picked out the picture of Archbishop Ormanian, who was in Constantinople at the time. For my picture, I started drawing the picture of Catholicos Sahag from Yeliki, which is this Catholicos Sahag from Yeliki, right here. And who had the highest church in the Sicilica, as well as he was the highest, who held the highest office in the church in Cilicia, as well as the Armenian church. On the competition day of the closing exercise, when I came to school, Mr. Mugadich, the drawing teacher, asked me, "Have you drawn anything?" I told him I had a drawing and it was at home and I can go and get it right away. I went and bought it before the set time. When I went into the classroom, I saw my drawing was put at the end of the line. Mr. Mugadij, when Mr. Mugadij saw my picture, he almost had a heart attack. His face changed color. He could hardly say it is good. He added that Armin Darson's work was also good. He used more sketch lines. I had worked with more precise details, just like as if it were an enlarged picture done with a machine. I had not signed my picture and mentioning the name of the subject, but my competitor had written Archbishop Ormanian under his picture. The measurements of the picture were 20 by 24 inches. We hung up my picture on the wall. I went and sat in a corner. The guests started coming, and we were told that Bishop Musak Seropian, who is this bishop here, Musak Seropian, would be there also. It seems he was especially invited to attend. At that time, I think he was the bishop of Adapkir, a large Armenian city. When he entered the hall, he was greeted with a big applause. He looked at the pictures on the wall. He exclaimed, "My Armenian religious father," when he saw my picture of Partygoers Sahag. He said, "This is a gorgeous picture," and he asked who did this. They pointed to me, where I was curled up in the corner. "God bless you. Long may you live." The Ormanian picture was forgotten, and Mr. Mergadic's neck was hanging down in dismay. The prize given to me was a pocket watch with Turkish numerals, which I have to this date. This is the pocket watch right here. In 1908, Partygoers Sahag went to Yeleki village, his village where he was born. When he was there, they showed him my picture. He said, "This is a talented boy. Bring him to me so I can take him with me." They told him the boy had gone to America. I think they get it mixed up. And he said, "I'm very happy that he was not left here." I came home proudly and said to my mother, "See what I got for my drawing? I won the competition, and the prize I got is here, a pocket watch." My mother, being preoccupied with her weaving, paid no attention to me, saying, "Sit down and help me get the thread ready for weaving my piece of cloth." When my father came home, I showed him the watch. He said, "Hurry up, we have to go out. It is our turn to have the stream water flow into our garden," because each family took a turn on the use of the stream water. Then I asked him what time, because now I had a watch. This was the first time that our family had a watch or clock. My father, with a little smile on his face, said, "Now there is no time to bother with a watch or clock. Now for a kid like me, this much encouragement was what I deserved, I guess. No one seemed to care about the many hours that I put into my drawings."
It's a nice watch, though.
Yeah, especially for
This
them.
is also
I'm sure it's got lots of jewels,
pocket watch.
but it's written in Arabic numerals, you
Right.
see, in the old Turkish style. Can you see?
And this is
Apparently it
also-
doesn't work anymore, right, Mary?
And one day I picked it up and I think I must have banged it. It doesn't work. And one of the
You used to wear that one.
I used to wear this one.
Yeah.
This was my father's old pocket watch. He had it for many years. So I had my name inscribed on it, and I wore it as a necklace.
Now we're going to jump a little bit.
Yes.
We're going to jump around because that's an interesting thing. It shows that he had talent very early on. And even though farm people were very practical and couldn't kind of give him the boost he needed, he must have had a lot of built-in spunk. So when he emigrated to the USA, he did his thing. Now Mary can tell us a little bit briefly about what he did, and ultimately ended up apprenticing in photography and never got paid for it, which is, I guess, not uncommon for that period. Then, I guess, saved enough money, bought a studio, and then he got married within a few months, I guess it was.
Right.
And there's going to be a picture here of, oops, sorry, we'll show the picture of Mary's mother and even Mary's little girl. But going back to the, quote, old country, Mary can show you, this is Kharpert City, or Kharpert Karak, the so-called Surphagop, or St. James Tar, or precinct, or ward, as we might say nowadays. And that's where her mother's people came from. So Mary can maybe spend a minute or two telling us about the family, the mother's family.
Yeah, this is my grandmother, my mother's mother, and her father. And my mother had already come to America. My mother's name was Teris, T-E-R-I-S. She was in America at the time. Oh, she was in Constantinople at the time, then she came to America, but she wasn't in this photograph. This is my mother's youngest sister, Astrid. She just passed away. And this is Birgui. She wasn't exactly a sister, but the Turks killed her parents when she was about 4 years old. And my grandmother took her to live as her daughter. And there's my mother's oldest sister, Rebecca Boyagian. This is the Hovsepian family. And that's my mother's youngest sister, Astrid Kachadurian. Well, actually, this is Ellie's Hovsepian Manasar. And this is my mother's brother, Antranig Hovsepian. He was in the export and import business. And this is another sister of my mother's, Peruz. She married a Casparian. Peruz and Ellie's both married cousins, and they lived next door to each other in Peekskill, New York, up near West Point. And my mother had another brother that was a veterinarian, her oldest brother, Hofsep. So my mother, her parents sent her to live with Hofsep, her brother Hofsep, in Constantinople before she came to America to get married, because the Turks had taken over the village. It was during the massacre. And they wanted her to be safe out of all the children. My mother was the most fair skin, and she was the prettiest out of all her daughters. And her parents were afraid that the Turks were going to harm her or rape her, or just, have her marry one of the Turkish soldiers, which they did.
So how is it that your grandfather kind of avoided being massacred or done in by the Turks?
And the only reason my grandfather survived the Turkish massacre is because he had a bakery. He had the largest bakery shop in Armenia, Yereki. And the Turks needed someone to bake and cook for them while they took over the village there. So that's the only reason they survived. My grandparents had a large home. They moved all this family into the barn next door with the animals, and the Turks took over. The Turkish soldiers took over their large home. So my grandparents, my grandfather used to bake bread and so forth for them, and my grandmother and her children used to wait on the Turkish soldiers and, cook their meals and wait on them,
So by being in a special trade, namely baking,
that's the only
they kind of were kept around a little bit.
Yeah.
And then she was also sent to Constantinople, where there was more visibility, and they were afraid to do too many people in after the initial thing. Now, one thing that was interesting to me is that there's a picture of a Protestant church, which I thought was in Kharpert, but I'm not sure. But they lived apparently opposite that Protestant church.
They lived directly across the street from the Protestant church.
They weren't Protestants, though, right? They were not Borakagan. They belonged to the National Church.
I think they belonged to the Apostolic Church.
Yeah, okay, but they're close
while
by.
They lived there, the church was right across the street, so they used to go attend the Protestant church there Sunday mornings.
There's a little confusion in my mind. Do you think your mother came from Yereki or in Kharpert? Kharpert Karak, or the city of Kharpert?
I think Kharpert.
How did she meet your father?
Well, it was sort of arranged. The families knew each other, and my
Okay.
father was already in America.
Okay,
his
so she
town.
may have been Yerexi also,
Probably,
from the same village.
Probably, I think so.
That may or may not be easy to find out, but
Uh-huh.
if that's the case, then see, this church looks a little bit flat.
Uh-huh.
Okay, on the level.
Yes.
Kharpert Karak was more terraced and hilly.
Uh-huh.
So unless that's down below, then it could well be Yereki village and so
Yeah.
on. But to make a long story short, there's Mary's mother. She's now left Constantinople and has come
Right.
to America,
To marry my father. And this is
fixed up, so to speak, or
their
soon to be
wedding
fixed up.
photograph. And then they just had one child, and that's me, Mary Christine Melikian.
This wedding happened 3 months after he bought the studio. The
Yeah.
bill of sale
May
is
and
right there.
September.
Yeah, and I have the bill of sale here. He purchased this studio
So it's all legal.
in May 7th, 1920, and he got married in September of 1920.
So he must have made enough money in 4 months to pay the bill, right?
And he purchased this studio for $900. And with the Century
money.
camera,
It was a lot
and
of
the
money, sure.
Yeah,
different
camera and
lenses,
everything that came with it.
Yeah, trimming board, cabinet, 2 rugs, 1 Cooper Hewitt lamp, many things here. Dressing
Was there a
table,
down
which is-
payment, or did he pay it cash?
It doesn't
Well, he
say,
had a
but-
partner,
At that time, yes.
so they must have split.
Maybe.
Yes, but when he first came, he apprenticed at this studio, 44 Front Street, and the gentleman's name was D. Duke. And he was Italian, but then he transferred it to an Armenian. There was an Armenian gentleman, another Armenian photographer. I can't think of
Minas?
his name. What?
Was it Minas?
I
Something,
forget.
Minas?
But there was another Armenian photographer, and he briefly was there for a while. But then there was a Mr. Kenoshian and my father that were also apprenticing at the same time. So then,
At no pay.
at no pay, right, just to learn the trade. And then this place, and then when the Italian photographer sold the Duke studio, the Mr. Kenoshian and my father decided to go into partners with each other. They made an agreement to be in partners for 4 years, to a partnership. And then the Mr. Kenoshian didn't like living in the city. He was a very nice gentleman, and everyone liked him as well. And my father was the more personable type, and with customers and so forth. And Mr. Kenoshian was more of a quiet type of a person. And he liked the country, so he moved to Clinton, Massachusetts. And he opened up a studio in Clinton, Massachusetts. And at that time, after 4 years, this studio happened to be available 421 Main Street, Harrington Corner in Worcester, Mass. So then my father purchased this studio for $900, and I'm still here to this day.
The rest is history, as
Yeah.
they say.
And today is what,
24th of
25th.
24th of February.
206,
Yeah.
2006, and I've been here almost 85 years.
You
Trying to
yourself?
June.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not that old, Mary. You're only 39.
Oh, thank you, June. I'm ageless, just remember that.
There you go. And you'll always be younger than she is, as I put it. No matter what, I'm still the baby. Now, I think we ought to take a nice view of the inner sanctum here.
This is the room that we don't like anybody to see, but come on in. We'll bring you through. This is the dark room, and these are all the old negatives we try to work in here, do our regular work, and then also these are all the old negatives that we have, like from 1910, 1915. On this box it says 1915 glass negatives. Whoops. Oh, it looks like a man, he's smoking a cigar. But anyway, there's millions of these, and this is what our friends were doing that came to visit us. Jean Taylor and Abe Krikorian. We're so thankful to you both. And these are all everything you see spread out here. This is all the pictures that we've been pulling out, and you can take a look at all the boxes, and this is our organization.
Well, it's a wealth of information, and it's been extremely interesting seeing all of these wonderful pictures, scanning them. Wealth of information.
All our ancestors coming out of the woodwork.
Now we're coming out of the darkroom area and storage into another room that has many, many boxes of pictures and negatives, right?
Yeah,
June?
all full of albums. We have all kinds of albums here, old city Worcester pictures, work that my uncle has done, albums that Mary put together very nicely, because we had boxes and boxes of negatives, and so she's displayed them very nicely here, all the old families, and there's also boxes above my head.
This is what I call orderly confusion.
Yeah. Oh, you can say it, Abe.
The fact is that both June and Mary are like truffle hounds. They can find anything that you ask for. All they need is a minute to kind of figure it out, and they pull it out.
Yeah.
So somehow or other they keep it straight.
Yeah.
Now you've seen the huge stacks of yellow boxes of old Kodak paper and so forth, full of negatives, full of prints, glossies, contacts, you name it, going back a zillion years. Some of it including even copy work that Mr. Melikian did from books and brochures, anything that caught his fancy. So we've been here scanning in this big room, which we've had access to, and although it looks a little bit disorganized, it's really not. We've been able to juggle 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes, and even as Mary and June rush around finding interesting stuff, they say, well, is this interesting or not? Well, our problem is that everything's interesting, but the fact is that we've done, God only knows how many scans now, maybe 15, 16, 1700.
I think about 1,600 scans.
That's all?
That's all. We're so lazy.
Talk more.
Maybe. We'll have to count them, because some of them he did multiple on one bed scan, like 4 on that one right this minute. So even though it's one scan, it's 4. So we can chop them out afterwards and work with them.
So we're using Hewlett-Packard Professional Scanner. This is the 8200 scanner, which is their new scanner. And we've been scanning at 600. Most of the pictures are scanned at 600 dpi as TIFF files. A few we've scanned at 1200. We've also scanned a few negatives. And we're using also a brand new Dell XPS, which is a state-of-the-art computer with 1 gig of memory. Really, we're going to get 2 because it really strains the computer at times when you're turning. And then we also use Photoshop CS2 and Photoshop Elements 4 and also AC/DC to view the pictures. So that's what we've been doing for the last 3 weeks.
These are our trusty brushes, you see, to get rid of all dust. Mr. Melikian's old camel hair trusty brush is actually still pretty wonderful. These aren't quite as good, but at least they work. They certainly get rid of all of the dust. But you see, we've got enormous amounts of stuff here. I mean, just look at it. The variety is really incredible. Huge
There's still
thing.
more. There's still more.
Well, there's still more. These things, look at this thing here. These large ones obviously couldn't fit on the scanner unless we broke it up into 4 parts or 2 parts, but when we've had smaller prints, we've worked on those, or shot these with the digital camera, with the new Sony. And they look pretty good. I'm sorry,
we're using the Nikon D200
yeah, it's good.
to photograph.
These were the Sagarians, you said,
Right.
that were key makers on Chandler Street. What's fun here is you see all the keys on the left, but look at the right-hand side. That looks like the old tin, embossed tin wall. But in any case, this gives you an idea. But Gene has become very, very adept at all of this.
I've always been interested in photography, and it's been extremely interesting to me to work with June and with Mary and to see all these wonderful pictures and how intuitive Mary's father was and June's family.
You know, this trusty
Such a
camera,
nice,
Yeah.
such a nice photograph.
which is inaccurately labeled. It's not a self-portrait, we decided. See?
It isn't because he's holding the...
Yeah.
Right. So,
He could have put it on time, though, couldn't he? Time
this can't
exposure?
be put on. Well, he might have had a modern camera for time, right? Who knows?
Mary, would your
Modern was out of the
time
question.
exposures, wouldn't it, or no?
Yeah.
Can you do a time exposure?
I've never tried it.
Okay.
Probably could, but I've never tried it.
But we've done a pretty representative bit of everything. Some more than others, but on the other hand, there's no way, short of spending a full year, that this stuff is going to be scanned. I've seen-
And how long have you been here, Abe?
We've been here, I think, what, 18 days?
But who's
19
counting?
days. It's
I
almost-
think today we're on this is our 17th day.
No, 19. We're up to 18. It's the 19th day
Okay.
of scanning. And we've done as much as
Wow.
humanly possible on in any given day. No doubt about that. Some of these things like Melikian family photos, the biggest challenge has been to get some of the stuff back into the right location. Now you see, this is an interesting box of the old glass negatives. Very interesting, but of course we can't scan glass negatives very easily. But there's a zillion of these, and of course they weigh a ton. Some of them are huge. I've never seen, there was one negative that was just incredible. I really don't know how he did it. It was probably 2 feet wide and 18 inches high, I don't know.
We've learned that in scanning negatives, on a flatbed scanner you need a light above and also below, and this scanner will scan slides and 35 millimeter strips. The light will come on, but what we have to do is I'll have to build something that will provide a light above, and then you get much better scans of negatives.
Now June over here, a lot of the stuff on the ground, on the floor I should say, is the larger stuff. He did a lot of artwork, as you know better than we do. This artwork, trial shoots, composites, you name it. Chachmach too. Certainly was a busy young fella for quite a few years here.
We practically lived
So-
here.
June has now taken over videoing.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a legacy here that we're glad to at least have captured a little bit of it.
You captured a lot of it. Well, you'll have to come back.
Well, we will. As they say,
We will
God,
be
God willing. Now, one of the fun parts of this little project has been that in some cases, June, I'll show you this so you know about this one. You see this?
Uh-huh.
That's at
Oh,
Armenian
yeah.
school picnic.
Mm-hmm.
Not picnic, the school group.
School, Armenian school
Yeah.
group.
And
Church.
The church group, taken in 1935-36. And I think it's a fascinating picture, so much so that we took the trouble to scan a picture that Mary and June made available. And then I spent 100 years on Adobe Acrobat putting numbers on each of the little kids And then what we did was have everybody and his cousin, who may have been around at that time, to make an attempt to identify everyone. So we set up a spreadsheet, and it went around and around and around and around, and I think we did a reasonable job. It wasn't perfect by any means, but we got quite a few people identified. It would have been nice to have everybody, but that wasn't possible. But that's another chore with all of this stuff. Some of them are labeled and captioned, others haven't been labeled and captioned. So the challenge is, can we kind of catch things at the last moment and see if we can rescue some of these unknowns, as it were, from potential oblivion.
June, you might want to take a picture of the computer screen, and I can just show a few of the scans that we've done today. That's an example of scanning 3. Now we can take Photoshop, cut them out, straighten them, and then work on these if they have spots. We can take spots out, enhance them various ways. Let's see.
Bless you.
We're scanning the back of them because there's information on many of those. We scan 2 at a time. So, and then today, but these are, we haven't scanned nearly as many as we have the previous days because we've been videoing today. But this is an example of what we're doing.
We wanted Mary to go through what she calls one of her more favorite albums and to just turn pages even as they're being videoed and have her make some of her comments. The thing that's been interesting for me also, looking at some of these things, is that artists and professional photographers like June and Mary have a very different take on these pictures. I look at them from one perspective and they look at them from another perspective. In other words, we all have eyes, but we all see different things or emphasize different things. So Mary wanted to go through, I guess it was a 1910 album, and just kind of leaf through it and comment. Maybe one of these years we can scan the whole thing, but right now we've just done a little bit of selective scanning from it, but that's remains to be seen. You've gotten an idea of how humongous this job has been. No getting around it. 85 years in itself ought to tell you what's going on. I mean, I mean,
And there's still more around.
I know. As they say, all these, as the Armenians
days.
would say, bujach and mitch. I don't know what bujachs you've looked in, but all these nooks and crannies yield things. Your pocket battleship submarine layout. But this room has been great.
Not really has.
Yeah.
And although we've laid out, I don't know how much more access they're going to have to it, but it's been good.
Yeah, very
We've
good.
made hay while the sun shines, although it's been snowing today a little bit.
Yeah.
Usually you've had boxes all over the room.
Oh, yeah.
the floor,
We,
exactly.
you cleaned up your act today.
Cleaned up our act,
So to speak.
True.
And Mary, do you want to show
Yes.
some of your father's work?
Yeah, I just thought.
Now let's see where you want to do that. Where do you want to do it?
These are some of the first photographs that my father, when he was apprenticing at D. Duke's studio on Front Street, these are some of the photographs that he did some oil coloring on and photographed as well. This is one of his oil colorings. This was in 1919. And then I have another photograph here. I have a few in this album I thought that might be of interest. And this is another one that he, when he was apprenticing at D. Duke Studio, this was taken in 1919. Yeah, and this was another light oil color that he did. And this is just a nice photograph in the bronze tone sepia. And then we have a few here that I thought might be of interest. And these are some nice classic poses These are on location photographs. And this is a family group. They photographed. These are all around 1919, 1920. And this is another sort of a classic photograph in 1910. No one takes photographs like this today. So it's just nice to remember. And this is a Miss Duhamel in 1910. It's the same photograph. Outdoor photograph on location. These are the Lacombe sisters. They lived on One Villa Road in Shrewsbury, Mass. This was taken in 1914. And this photograph is of a gentleman taken in 1910. Oh, the date is right there. This is another photograph using the Rembrandt lighting.
It's pretty.
What was meant by Rembrandt lighting?
They photographed like sort of a silhouette type, highlighted your kind of nose and your cheeks.
You want to go back to that and take it out of there, Mary, and let
Which
us
one?
see?
That one?
Is
yes.
that the Rembrandt?
That's like a Rembrandt lighting. There are a few others.
That's good. If you can hold that up, maybe June, you can hold that up.
This
Or-
one?
Yeah, that's fine.
Just hold
Mary
it like
has
this?
right.
Oh, okay.
That's not going to reflect. That's fine.
Well, he would highlight the forehead and the cheeks. Little, he didn't do this as much as he did some of the others.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is one of my favorites. I love, probably because I like
This
flowers.
is Mrs. Brown and Irma, baby Irma. And this was around the same period, 1910, 12. Excuse me.
I wonder what camera he would have used. He wouldn't have used that big.
No, he had a camera that he used to
Take
take
out.
on location. Where
Mm-hmm.
he photographed these outdoor shots.
Because that panoramic camera was a different type of camera
He had
too.
2 or 3 cameras that were quite heavy that he used to take out. And this is, I think, a gentleman playing the piano, a pianist or organist. And this is Bishop Seropian. He photographed him in 3 different ways.
That's the same person?
Same person.
Mm-hmm.
This is another sort of a classic photograph. This was Agnes Melikian Tavagian, 1910.
One of our cousins.
One of my cousins.
You want to take it out, Mary, totally, and we'll
That's
just...
all right.
Nice looking girl. Beautiful bow too, huh?
She used to be the organist at the Armenian Church of Our Savior for many years. Oh, this is,
I think we scanned that
Yes, you
picture.
did,
Yes, we scanned
right.
that picture.
and I think you scanned
We
this.
scanned that,
Yeah,
I
that's
believe,
an
also.
Arab, yeah. This is the write-up in the photography magazine of this photograph. This is another photograph of Mr. Popkin on a Spigian.
When was that taken, Mary?
About the same time, I think maybe 1920s. His son is a dentist today, Dr. Bob Anaspigian.
Okay.
This is a group of children's photographs. Their name is Edoff, E-D-O-F-F, 1910. Well, it's the same person. And these are just Miss Kazanjian, 1910. Look at the clothing and the little bloomers the girls used to wear and the little bows. You don't see that nowadays. And this is E.J. Wright, 1910. Look at her.
Good.
This is Mrs. Zuckerman, 1910. That's her too. Oh, I guess these are all her. And these little boys in sailor suits. You don't see little boys today. Their name is Nestor, N-E-S-T-E-R, 1910. Oh, his name is Nestor. This looks like Erickson. That was 1911.
Mm-hmm.
Just the old telephones. My father loved flowers. He always had little girls holding baskets of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
These are just different photographs. 1920, 1920. It's 1910. And these are, this gentleman is about 80 now today. He's still living. My father used to take quite a bit of his photographs. The Dick family, George Dick family. And these are two sisters. Oh, this is a...
We scanned that.
Yes, okay. And this is on a canoe here.
Mm-hmm.
Canoeing. I think we probably scanned this. It's May 7th, 1920, a Chinese gentleman.
I don't remember scanning that. We may have.
And this is the Armenian magician.
No, we didn't scan that one. We have two other pictures of him.
That was the same one. His name is Jordan. I forget his last name.
Okay.
And this lady used to be a photographer down the street here. This is Rembrandt lighting, like the highlights. They were a well-known photographer in Worcester for many years, Bouchang Studio. They were down the street from us. It's Mr. Melkov.
He must be Armenian, Melkonian or something.
Could be. This is
is
Leon Hovsepian. He's a famous artist, heavy oil color artist. And June had him in art school at the Worcester Art Museum. He was her instructor. He was there for 40 years. And he's still living. He's 94 as of now.
Yeah, he's a good instructor.
He must have been my sister Mary's instructor too.
Probably.
What year?
These are,
Well, sort
just
of 40, maybe 48 or so. 40 years he may
This
not
looks
have been.
like kind of an airbrush type photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 22, is it? Yeah, Miss Alma Moore.
Is that what they call a finger wave?
Right, a finger wave, and this is the Rembrandt lighting. My father more or less introduced it in the area here. Not too many of the photographers use that type of lighting. So they used to use flat lighting like this here.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Conjoyan. Oh, he's a dentist, Conjoyan. This is, I don't know, photograph this. Oh, this is a family group. Look how well they were dressed, and the shoes and the stockings and the bows. Mesrobian family. Let's see.
You can see that Mary is a firm believer in stickums.
Right. Well, people come into the studio and go through the albums, and then they have told us who they were.
Tarkanian
So we
family.
write the names down.
My father has all, seems like he has the little girls holding little bouquets and flowers. And this is another
Wonder if he's related to the football coach. But they wouldn't have been from here, unless maybe they moved out west.
This is the Bagdasarian family. Most of the girls had long baloney curls in those days. Oh, this is a lady sitting on the porch here.
That's a wonderful picture.
It's a wonderful picture. It's not a good print. It
Yeah,
could be printed
yeah.
This
better.
is this lady here.
Maybe that's
just a
is that
proof.
a print? Okay.
It's just a proof.
But look at that garden.
Oh, that's just another gentleman. Another family, Duranian family. So this is Dr. Duranian's father there. I don't know if that's his mother or not, no. He's my dentist. This is taken in someone's home, Caprilian family. It's another oil color my father did.
Who does that represent?
Yeah, I don't know who this is.
That wasn't Mr.
Can you
Malkin.
make out the name, Joe? And this was taken at the studio. My father used to paint in quite a bit of these backgrounds. So this was during World War II when her boyfriend was in the service, so she sent him this. So my father made like a little sea background, ocean background. And he's the pastor of All Saints Church, Reverend Preston.
Was one of the earlier Armenian immigrants. I remember him from Sunday school days, but he did a village history of one of the suburbs of Kharpert or Kharput city.
They were from
Husenig.
Right.
This is in Armenian and in English, and then they did an English version as well. But there's huge amounts of photographic material here from the K.S. Melikian collection from the Old Country. He wasn't a photographer in the Old Country, but apparently had enough interest in the Old Country, as we put it, to have wanted some reminiscences of where he was born and so forth, and sent money over, and pictures were taken and sent back, or maybe even negatives, we're not sure. Mary thought maybe even some of it might have been developed here. It's hard to know.
Yes, I think my father developed most of the negatives here.
Yeah, well, he wanted to remember
All the
Old
people
Country,
in
too.
the village.
Now, this is an interesting book. It's about Arab-American faces and voices, written by a friend of Mary's.
Yeah,
They
she
actually
was
live in the
also-
same building. But,
Right.
but there's some pictures in here that come from the Melikian collection, right? Even though it deals with Arabs, because Mr. Melikian took photographs of the Assyrian community, some of the Greek community, the Albanian community, and what all. Yeah, interesting. It's a nice book that she's done. They're all pretty good books.
Yeah,
Here's yet
good
another
books.
one. As June was saying, they come looking for their family roots. But here's one, Farewell Kharpert,
Right,
which was done by a family in Michigan.
right.
Actually,
People
I
would
should
come in
say
and
Wisconsin.
They'd
Worcester,
look
yeah.
at the pictures like previous generations, and they'd come and tell us the stories about the massacre, and they'd sit here and cry, and it was so sad and touching. But that's why we have to preserve all these pictures now. And
Here's an interesting book, Sacrifice and Redemption, done by a woman named Marion Kazarian, who's in her 90s now, I
Right,
guess.
she's still living. She's one of the survivors of the genocide. There aren't too many left, and she's one of the last survivors.
right, and she had a good memory of all the.
Yeah, there's a
Community.
lot in here on the Armenian families and even some of the addresses, which while aren't perfect in some
Right.
cases, at least she's made an attempt to get them all down.
Right.
A lot of interesting pictures in that as well.
Yeah.
So anyways, when June said this is a little mini museum,
Right.
she wasn't kidding. Now, we've said a little bit about the history and referred to the place as being a mini museum and photo archive, but what we want to do is just spend a little bit of time going through the studio as it's now set up, and it really is, I think, an incredible place, because I think they're the last photographers anywhere, probably, that still do what I call classical photography. Only now are they kind of semi-toying with the idea that they might do digital, but this is photography at its best in the old classical style. And they've got some examples of it, and when you look at these versus, say, a homemade digital, you can tell the difference. It's an incredible place, and they've got all kinds of signs of what they do. They've got toys for kids because they photograph little kids and they have to keep their attention. So what we're going to do is ask Mary and June to kind of wander around a little bit, and then we'll go into the corridor and just see some examples.
Yeah. These are some of the photographs that June has taken in the studio here. June takes most of the family portraits, and
These are all our friends on the wall.
right. So
Some of them are third generation.
they are right.
We've taken, your father took their
Parents,
parents
friends.
and grandparents, and then we've taken the children, and it's like one big family here.
One big happy family.
Yeah.
And I usually go out with we have a few candid photographers, and I usually go out with the in
Tubercu-
1941.
41, and she was what, 39, 41
Oh,
years
she's
old?
41, I think.
Yeah.
41, yeah.
Much too young, of tuberculosis, as so many people did in that period. But in any case, if you just go through all these shelves, you'll see how much history there is. Everywhere. And a little bit later on, we'll show you a bust that was made by
And
his
here's-
older brother,
here's a
June's
photo-
grandfather.
Here's a photograph
In
of
fact,
June with the bust.
here's a nice picture. June
Let
can,
me take it out
I'll
of the,
give it to June in a moment here.
This
But
bust was made by June's grandfather. It's a plaster of Paris bust. And June's grandfather, my father's brother, Partygoers, used to make up these sculptures.
he was clearly very talented. He did the altar for the Armenian Apostolic Church of Our Savior.
Yeah.
He did St. Mary's Assyrian church altar.
Yeah.
All kind. He apparently did things for the Haverhill Church as well. I mean, just all over the place.
And he died young, 39 years old.
Much too young. Yeah.
This is a photograph of my parents. My mother's name was Therese Hovsepian Melikian. And she married my father, Kazar Sarkis Melikian. And this was September 9th, I think, 1920. And my father was a photographer. He apprenticed on Front Street. There was a D. Duke studio on Front Street. We're located now at 421 Main Street. And he apprenticed there for a few years until he purchased this studio in 1920. So we've been at this same location for about 85 years. And then my father passed away in 1969. And so I just decided to continue the business. And I was the first woman photographer in Worcester that owned and operated her own photograph business. And my father's niece, June Benoit, has been with me for I don't know how many years, June, about 30.
40. Since I was about 14 years old.
And she's my right-hand person, and she does most of the photographing now. And would you like to say a few words, June?
Well, it's been a good life.
Yeah.
It's been like a little museum here, working with the old pictures and the new pictures and pushing things aside. All of a sudden you don't know what's going to pop up. Something from 1900 or 2006.
June, having said that this place is like a museum, and she's constantly digging up stuff, both she and Mary have been supplying Jean and me with all these pictures and coming across stuff they've known about but hadn't located for quite some years. But these books that we're going to wave around here a little bit are a good indication of just a small sample of what the Melikian studio has provided photographs for. In fact, the most recent one, I think, Mary and June said that this is by an old...
Harry Sogigian
Yeah.
wrote this book. It just came out in December 2005. And we worked on a few pictures with Harry. And
And June
There's
printed
many-
most of the photographs.
yeah, a lot of Melikian photos here. People come into the studio from all over the world. It's like a little museum, and they come and they try to find their family roots, family photographs. They try to put together their family history. They find photos for their writing new books like we have here. There's Dr. Duranian's book,
Yes.
Worcester is America, and Mary's father, my great uncle, worked with Dr. Duranian's father on his book
Right.
before, and this was Dr. Duranian's book that we worked.
And this is a photograph of Dr. Duranian.
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
dentist across the street.
Right, he's
Right.
my
And his
dentist.
father, Kazar Sarkis Melikian, as we would say in Armenian. Downtown Worcester is still pretty busy, especially in the Harrington Corner area. We'll be able to see down Front Street, and then of course one of the real signposts of Worcester is the old City Hall, done in the Venetian and Florentine style. Actually magnificent architecture. The building is in quite good shape, still being used of course. And behind it is the old Worcester Commons, a lot of old monuments and what all. The downtown city center is something that postdates me, but the fact is that the City Hall is still a pretty impressive monument. Mr. Melikian, interestingly, photographed the tower more than once over the years, and some postcards were made showing the City Hall. He was never given credit on these postcards, but I was pleased to learn that in fact he did it from his studio window. this will be a much brighter view of the tower. Now we're across the street in the lobby of the building, and we're going to walk upstairs even though there's an elevator. And now this is the corridor of the studio. After going through that blustery windstorm and snow flurries, we're here on the 3rd floor, looking at the main entrance to the studio office. We see Mary Melikian from a distance. She's talking to her cousin June. As we've said, the two of them now maintain the Melikian studios. So we'll make our way down there and introduce ourselves. We're in the studio now, and Mary Melikian is on the right. She'll say hello in a moment. Say hi, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Melikian.
And to her right is June Benoit, her cousin.
Hello, how are you?
They've been running the Melikian studios since Mary's dad died in March, I guess, of 1969.
Yeah, that's right.
Prior to that, it was called the KS Melikian Studio, but now they just go by Melikian. But they've been holding the fort for quite a few years. And of course, they worked with Mr. Melikian right from the beginning. Mary helped her dad in all kinds of things, doing coloration, and June also, even as she was a young girl. So they've spent quite a few years in these quarters. In fact, I think Mary said that they've been here some 85, going on 86 years in this very building.
1920, yeah.
Yeah, they occupy a little less space than they used to do, but the place is what I call a pocket battleship. The place is so tightly worked up that there's all kinds of history right here in this one room. You could spend a lifetime. We've been here 3 weeks, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we could have spent 3 years here. I'm Abraham der Krikorian, also known as Abram der Krikorian, born in Worcester, Mass, but lo, these many years away from this fine city. The aspect of history around here that becomes really evident all over the place, as we said, is that this has been a family business for donkey's years. Here's a picture of Mr. Melikian taken by himself. He was really quite ingenious, I think, taking all kinds of pictures of himself, by himself, apparently with a camera that we're going to see before too long, with a long extension cord and bulb. But here's a nice wedding picture. He apparently relinquished the opportunity on this one occasion to not take his own wedding picture. Mary said that someone else took that photo.
Yeah.
But there he is with his wife, Teres.
Right.
Mary is the offspring of this union. Unfortunately, Mrs. Melikian died all too young. 24th of February. It's a Friday, 2006. We're in downtown Worcester, Massachusetts, where we've been for nearly 3 weeks, scanning photographs from the collection of K.S. Melikian and Melikian Studios. We're at a corner called Harrington Corner, which is on the corner of Main Street and Front Street, a central part of town. Worcester has seen slightly better days, but in any case, the third floor of this building is where the Melikian Studios have done their work for over 85 years. It's certainly one of the oldest studios of classic photography in Worcester. The entrance, which we'll see in a moment, is down below. The building is predominantly vacant right now. A lot of downtowns across the country, of course, have lost their former vigor. There's a lot of activity, but the building is, in fact, only partially filled. The Melikian Studio is run by the daughter of K.S. Melikian, Mary Melikian, and her cousin June Benoit. Her grandfather was the older brother of Mary Melikian's father, K.S. Melikian.